Hi, everyone. My name is Kaylee, and I'm an event host for Bank Square Books and Savoy Bookshop and Cafe. We are delighted that you were able to tune into this evening's virtual event. Just a few pieces of business before we begin. There are some quick setting modifications that we encourage you to make on Zoom that will make the event experience a little more interactive. If you escape full screen, you can activate the chat and Q&A features on Zoom. If you want to participate in the chat, you can set your chat settings to all panelists and attendees. We encourage you to chat in during the event, so be sure to say hello and let us know where you're viewing from. We just ask that you adhere to our virtual event code of conduct, which has already been posted in the chat. You can also ask questions in the Q&A module at the bottom of the screen, as well as upvote those that are most interesting. We will get to audience questions at the end of the event. This event is being recorded, so if you have to leave, the recording will be available at a later date. If you'd like to order a copy of tonight's event book, we will be posting links in the chat throughout the event. This will take you to our website where you can complete your purchase. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you to Steven Rowley tonight to discuss the Gunkle with us. Steven Rowley is the best-selling author of Lily and the Octopus, a Washington Post notable book of 2016, and the editor, named NPR and Esquire magazine as one of the best books of 2019. His new novel, The Gunkle, came out in May of this year. O magazine hails it as one of LGBT books changing the literary landscape. Rowley's fiction has been published in 20 languages. Steven has worked as a freelance writer, newspaper columnist, and screenwriter. Originally from Portland, Maine, he's the graduate of Emerson College. He currently resides in Palm Springs with his husband, the writer Byron Lane. Steven will be in conversation with Rick Koster from The Day. Rick has been working as an arts and culture writer for The Day for over 20 years. His pieces have appeared in the Dallas Observer, Houston Press, Offbeat, and American Way. He is the author of 3 books, and he told me to say that they were the worst-selling books of all time. Steven and Rick will speak for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to your questions that have been submitted through the Q&A button. And now, I'll ask our panelists to turn on their cameras and mics, and I'll turn the event over to them.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. There we are. Hi, Steven.
Hi, Rick. It's great to be with you. And thank you again for a lovely review that was in The Day that you had written. It means so much.
Well, you're welcome. It's if it wasn't a great book, I couldn't write it. And I don't even know if I sent you the feature story I wrote. So maybe
now I haven't seen that yet.
Oh, it's glowing. It sparkles. It sparkles.
All right, well, that'll be it's always a good day when the Google alert I have on myself yields glowing results. So I look forward to that.
I apologize. I should have sent you a link. I'm an idiot. But anyway, thank you for being with us. And yeah, congratulations on a really, really good book for a lot of reasons. And I thought I would let you, if you don't mind, because I don't want to spoil anything. Why don't you tell everybody that might not have read the book a little bit about it, and then we'll talk.
Sure, absolutely. And you are dressed in Gunkle yellow. Here is the book itself. You're kind of dressed to match the cover there. But yeah, I'll even take one step further back in that anyone who does not know what a Gunkle is, it has become quite popular slang in the past 5 or maybe 10 years for a gay uncle. And more than that, it has sort of a connotation of a larger than life personality, a sort of anti-Mame figure or Uncle Mame, if you will. And this book concerns Patrick O'Hara, who's a retired television star living kind of a reclusive life in Palm Springs as he's grieving his own loss, when he is tasked with taking in his niece and nephew, ages 6 and 9, for the summer after they lose their mother to cancer. And that fresh loss and their time together sort of brings about a season of healing for all 3 of them.
That sounds good. Okay, excellent. Now, the thing that you have done so wonderfully in this book of many things, Steven, is that you walk an amazing tightrope between a really funny book and one that deals wisely and poignantly with grief. And I don't think that's an easy thing to do. It's not that in Lily and the giant octopus, or I mean Lily and the octopus, or the editor, that you didn't kind of deal with similar themes. But talk about that. Talk about you're dealing with some very sad and tragic stuff. But man, I find myself laughing every 2 or 3 paragraphs without it detracting from the other part.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, I should add to my pitch that, yeah, I do think it's a funny book. It is, as you say, it's a deep exploration of grief also. So there are moments that aren't so funny, but I do think that at its heart, there is a lot of humor there, which can be a real coping mechanism for us. And it's been very interesting to have this book came out in May, at a moment when we had, and to the extent that it's about a character who's been self-isolating, sort of finding his way back into the light, that's where we all were for the past, at the time, 15 months or so, where we'd all felt very isolated and because of vaccines and whatnot. And, it's a little different now than it was in May, but it looked like, we were re-entering life in a certain way. And so, I think that the book has resonated with people. Even a lot of us have been grieving, even if it's not an actual loss of a family member, although tragically, so many families have dealt with that. But just grieving a year where we haven't been able to embrace one another, literally, and figuratively, or spend time together, or be able to accomplish what we'd hoped with that time, the idea of sort of losing time. And humor was a big way that certainly I've dealt with that, and I think a lot of people have too. And I think that's really life. Like humor is one of our biggest coping mechanisms for tragedy and for grieving and continuing on. But it's a skill in a book like this. One joke too many, and it really changes the tone of a scene or a chapter. And conversely, if you go too long without, the levity that a joke can provide, the book becomes too dark. So as you say, it's a true balancing act. And to the extent that that people say I got it right, I'm grateful for that.
Well, you did. I want to throw sort of a 2-part question at you. One is that, it's fiction. I don't remember whether it was the guy who wrote the Hardy Boys or Charles Dickens that said, we made it up. So it is fiction.
These are the options, the Hardy Boys, or
I can't remember which one. I know it was one of those guys, but what I was going to say is, my wife and I don't have children. You and your husband do not have children.
No.
And I cannot think of a harder thing to write, again, walking over that tightrope, than young children dealing with that situation. And man, the only thing I was really irritated about your book is that I've never wanted, we didn't want kids. We're dog people. But after that, after reading your book, I was mad they were fictional because I wanted to adopt them. So, but so the first part of the question would be, what was it like writing in the voice of 2 children, grade school age children?
Yeah, you're correct in saying I don't have children, and I was very aware of that, as an artist, as a writer, that inarguably having and raising children is one of life's great emotional experiences, and not one that I have to draw on. And yet I felt, like any great armchair quarterback, I had a few things I wanted to say on the subject. Now, having said that, I am in real life the uncle to 5 kids, the oldest of whom is 12. So they all kind of fall in this age range. And, I've been very surprised and touched by how important these relationships have been in my life. And certainly I'm around friends who have kids, and I'm an honorary uncle to many more. So Yeah, in terms of writing them and then getting their voices or just right, I drew on my real relationships with my nieces and nephews, and God help you if any of you are related to writers, because we lift or outright steal. I forget who the talking of quotes. There was an author who said, the good writers borrow, great writers steal. And so to the extent that I did, lifted any personal details from them, I'm sorry, and the book is dedicated to them, so I hope they will forgive me. But I think it's like not trying to write kids. Patrick, he seems not suited to the job at first, and that's because he doesn't really know how to relate to kids, and he talks to them like little adults. Now, these kids are grieving and they're frightened and they've just suffered a tremendous loss, and I think kids, at that age don't want to be talked down to when they're scared like that. That they want an adult to treat them seriously, and not treat them with kid gloves and talk to them, seriously. And so, what makes Patrick seem ill-suited to the task at the outset actually becomes one of his greatest strengths. And sort of conversely with the children too, I didn't want to write them too much like children because they've had to do a lot of growing up real fast, sadly, given the situation that they're in. But then, thinking about how they experience grief and how much they're in shock and how much they have the ability to laugh still or to be kids and to and maybe to be open to a little bit of fun. That was the challenge in there. And I adore these kids too. And there are days, that I have to remember for half a second that people like you say wonderful things about them. I want to call them on the phone and tell them, hey, people out there really love you. And I have to remember, oh yeah, they're actually just in here.
No, you can't call them on the phone. They're having dinner over here right now. So
oh, good. Well, treat them well. Give them an extra serving of dessert from their Uncle Steve.
I will. Now, the second part of that question was, I had just asked you about creating something about which you had no real tangible experience. So now I want to go in the other direction and say, do you think you could have written any of these three books when you were 25 years old? Because all of them, to one extent or another, and particularly the Gunkle, since we're talking about it, although Lily too, but they deal with grief and sorrow in a way that makes me think. I lost my best friend at 25, and I don't think I knew how to process it the way that I would process it now. And you write again beautifully about the stages of grief, so to speak. Could you have written these books 20 years ago?
No. And I tried. I think I tried. I published Lily and the Octopus. My first novel was published. I just turned 45 at that time, and it was one of these deals. I was been very fortunate. It was one of these deals that made headlines and whatnot, and set me up and looked like it was a publishing fairy tale, and I was an overnight success. But what people don't see is that behind every overnight success is, 15, 20 years of hard work. I tried writing novels, starting in my 20s, and it just didn't take. I've got several manuscripts sitting on a shelf that I should probably burn if I don't want to end up like Harper Lee and published later on. That never went anywhere, and rightfully. I'm always jealous of someone who comes out of a prestigious program like the Iowa Writers Workshop and publishes a novel at 25. And there's some brilliant people who have done that. For me, living was essential to finding my voice as a writer, and that means having both successes and failures and triumphs and losses. And learning from those, and learning how to talk about those, and the issues that I write about are, certainly issues that I think that are more commonly faced in midlife than when you're that young. I think particularly Lily and the Octopus was a book about a man and his dog, his elderly dog. To establish that relationship, they had to live a whole life, a whole lifetime together. And so that's just not something that you can, they sort of grew up together, and you can't write that before the growing up happened.
Right. You said something that I quoted in the article that I was too stupid to email you.
Uh-oh.
But
what did I say?
Which I will. That I thought was incredibly, if not profound, something I had never thought about. I am a big fan of funny books that can make you laugh out loud. Some of them tend towards the literary, some of them tend towards genre, but if it's laugh out loud, it's laugh out loud. It never occurred to me what you said, which was you always try to write humor as a result of character rather than making fun, even though it might be easy, of something topical that's going on in the world right now, because who the hell knows what's going to be 5 years from now. But it had never occurred to me. And was that a lesson you learned, or was it just something that seemed obvious to you?
I think I learned it. It's just a very different skill set, obviously, novel writing. I'm not writing the monologue to open the Tonight Show, where you can talk about the, world events of that day, and it burns very brightly for a brief moment, and then it's gone. There's never a rerun where you're going to have to go back and revisit that. Whereas novel writing, it's a long process to begin with, just to write the book, and then publishing is a long lead industry where even after you're done writing it, it could be another 15 months before the book hits shelves. And then once it is on sale, you hope that book has a long shelf life, and that people will be discovering it, years into the future. So I think comedy in novel writing is most successful when the laughs are truly inherent to the character, that it is a real, and their interactions with others, and that it feels authentic. Because I think that those are the laughs that will endure. In good ways, society is changing very quickly. The things that might be acceptable to make fun of today may not be acceptable even 5 years from now. And certainly, things are changing, in not great ways as well. And so, to find that balance, I do think, yeah, as you say, comedy from character, and that's what I enjoy writing anyway. But you really have to be able to joke as someone else. You really have to know them, and that requires some work that that you don't see on the page. An example of that is there's a letter in the book that the main character has written years before, and he finds this letter and he sees it. And now that was work I never intended to go into the book. I wrote it as an exercise for myself, because here we're entering Patrick's life after he's been grieving a loss for 10 years. So grief has entered the fabric of who he is, and we're seeing him sort of hardened. And I wanted to understand what that grief looked like fresh. And to do that, I needed to sort of write a little bit about that. I didn't expect it to go in the book. It ended up in there, and I'm happy about that, so that readers can see this. But sometimes it takes work like that, real sort of writing character studies, to then be able to effortlessly speak, in their voice, and crack jokes, and have dialogue that feels real.
Write anything, and I more than understand the process of revision, and then getting line edits and suggestions from your agents and editors and that sort of thing. But did you write anything, or have you written anything that you just thought was outstanding, or whether it was funny or whatever, and then you realize this is pretty great, but it just doesn't fit?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a phrase for that too amongst writers, the sort of kill your darlings, that there are jokes that you think, or you've written something, a paragraph or a turn of phrase that you think is particularly good, but it doesn't move the story forward. It doesn't advance the plot, or for some reason it's just weighing everything down despite how great the writing is. And those are the hardest cuts to make. I think very highly of editors. Obviously, my previous novel was called the editor, celebrating one of America's most famous editors, Jacqueline Onassis, who had a 15-year career as a book editor after her second husband died. So obviously I hold editors in high esteem, but boy, does that irk me sometimes when that red line goes through something that I really, really adore. And I have to sit there, sometimes arms crossed going, am I going to take this edit or am I going to fight back? And 99 times out of 100, the red pen is right, and I'm being stubborn. That's harsh. The only thing I can say is I never hit the delete key. I hit the cut key, and I'll paste those. I have a long folder of those darlings that I hope to find homes for. They're like cute little dogs at the shelter. I'm gonna want to adopt them someday and bring them into another home. So we'll see.
I want you mentioned this at the outset, at the top of the program, but let me set this scene for you. And I told you this on the phone, but just by chance, like the week before you and I spoke for the first time, I believe we had exchanged emails, but my wife and I saw on Turner Classics the Rosalind Russell Auntie May.
Yeah.
And then I started reading the Gunkle, and I'll be damned if you didn't have a press release. You're sort of obsessed with Auntie May in all of its forms from the original novel. And it was I don't think I ever would have put it together if you hadn't had that in the press release. But what a remarkable way to use that as a bit of inspiration. And was that something hard to fit? Because it's not, the scenario doesn't remind me of Auntie Mame until you tell me it does. Does that make sense?
Well, that's really wonderful to hear, because I've always admired stories. There's sort of modern retelling. The movie Clueless was a modern retelling of Jane Austen's Emma. Anytime you can take there's certainly, we've done this with Shakespeare. Sometimes you take that model of a classic story structure, and then you sort of lay over a modern interpretation or reinvention of it. I've always admired that and enjoyed that, and because there can be some fun tongue-in-cheek elements. The best of them work on their own even if you don't know the source material, and then if you do know the source material, there's a wink and a nod to it. Now, again, Auntie May, this is not a retelling of Auntie Mame per se, but there are certain characters in the Gunkle that are nods to supporting characters in Auntie Mame, and there's a couple lines that draw a parallel, I think. But yeah, it's more than that. It's I've had a long obsession with that sort of the magical caregiver, the Mary Poppins who blows in on the wind, is there for the children when they need her most, and she's gone with the next wind. Gone with the wind. Wait a minute, that's a now I'm mixing genres here. But Maria and the Sound of Music, those sort of magical caregiver stories, and it was very exciting for me in this time to sort of create a queer entry into that genre in a moment where now gay marriage equality is here, and there are many more LGBT families raising kids and doing remarkable job with children, and oftentimes children who don't have access to other homes. And so to create a story like this, or an entry into that genre in this moment was something that was really enjoyable for me.
I think you mentioned previous question in the editor that you took the idea of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis as a book editor, and she was she at Knopf? She was at some big house, right?
She was at Doubleday for the bulk of her Viking for the first 2 years, and then the bulk of her career at Doubleday. Yeah.
Okay. When you had the idea to write that, and the reason I'm kind of getting away from the Gunkle for just a minute is a lot of, I find in these interviews for our book club, a lot of the folks out there paying attention are writers or would like to be writers and are very fascinated by the process, not just how you sit down and do it,
Mhm.
but the business of it, getting an agent or whatever. And so when you came up with the idea of the editor, did you have to convince your agent or your editor, I've got this idea, I want to do a book where Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis is a very real character as her role in her role as an editor. How was that fielded, or whatever you would say?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question, because I do like to be very honest, for particularly for anyone who has writing aspirations or wants to work in the profession. So my first book, Lily and the Octopus, it's about a man and his aging dog and coming to terms with loss. And I somewhere along the lines, it was semi-autobiographical, or what they might call autofiction, although I threw in an octopus at some point, because what I inherently realized was, I don't know, it made sense to me. Like, what I was writing about, what I wanted to write about, was attachment and how difficult it can be to let go. And adding that actual, like tentacular metaphor, in the octopus made kind of the story for me. But it was a weird little story. I had a hard time getting that published. If you want to hear absolute crickets on the other end of a telephone line, call New York publishing agents and ask if they want to read a book about a dog and an octopus. You won't get very far. But I persevered, and that book was published, and it found an audience, and it became a national bestseller, and was translated in languages all over the world, and the film version is in the works, and all these wonderful things. And I came time for my next book, and I really was passionate about this Jacqueline Onassis story. It's something I've been working on for a while, but I also had a personal connection to the other part of the story, where it's a young man writing about his mother, right? And Jacqueline Onassis acquires his book for publication, so he's sort of stuck between his trying to understand his own flawed mother, and then this idealized version of America's mother, and he's trying to please these two mistresses in a way. I had written a few things about my mother in Lily and the Octopus, which I thought were quite beautiful. She didn't exactly see them in the same way. But so, I write to understand. I had lost this dog. I was writing to understand and process that relationship and that grief. I had, written about my mother a little bit in that first book. It created some tension in our relationship. We got through it. She's great. She's my biggest fan now. But I wanted to write to understand that. And so it made sense to me to pivot in that way. But Simon & Schuster, my first publisher, rejected my follow-up manuscript, and really didn't see that as where my career should go next. And I had to give that real thought. Do I try to come up with another dog-themed book, perhaps, or something that would be a more natural follow-up to Lily and the Octopus, or do I listen to my gut? And when it came down to it, I thought, if I'd asked anyone's permission to write about a dog and an octopus, like literally no one would have said that's a good idea. So I stuck with my gut, and I left, and I was picked up by Putnam, who is my publisher now. And so it was a leap of faith, but one that I felt I wanted to take because I was passionate about telling that story. So I think there's a lot of misperception that if you get an agent or you get a book published, then it's easy street from there on out. And I like to be honest about that. Each one is a process, and it finds its own way to into bookstores.
Is it fair to ask, and I more than understand if you don't want to, but when you said, you know what, I think this book should be published, did your agent immediately go, well, let's take it somewhere else? Or did he go, think about this, Steven, because that sort of thing?
Well, he was a fan of the book, so he did ask me to think about it, but only to make sure that it was, truly coming from me, and that it was the right decision, and that it was my career, and I would be taking a risk, and he wanted to make sure I had thought it through. But he's been a steadfast supporter in my corner, and I'm very grateful for him. That's become a very, important relationship. I guess I should write a book called The Agent now. It's become such a, particularly, this past year when it's a very solitary work novel writing. And yes, I have some support, like an agent or something, but you know, he's sometimes my real connection to the outside world. So it's almost like someone galloping into the castle on horseback. Sometimes when he calls, I'd be like, "Hark, what word hath you from the outside world?" You know, I come to rely on him quite a bit, but yeah, we did roll the dice and it worked out really well. So
You you opened the door for this because I didn't know that Lily and the Octopus was being made into a film, and congratulations. I cannot imagine how much fun it would be to see the Gunkle in movie form. It just seems like it would be an instant winner. Is there anything you can share on that front, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very fortunate. All three books are being turned into movies right now. The Gunkle has film rights have been picked up by Lionsgate, which is one of the studios here in Hollywood, and I am writing the adaptation. So that's what I've been hard at work on these past few weeks, and it's been very fun to be back in this world and to spend time with these characters again. I think if you read the book, though, that this is I chose not to try to adapt or write the screenplay for Lily and the Octopus. I just didn't feel I was the right person for that job. One, the story was deeply personal to me. Not that these aren't, but that was, it really stemmed from my life, that first novel. And then I had added all these elements that I had no idea how would translate to the screen. I think if you read the Gunkle, though, there's a lot of dialogue already. It's already very visual, as a very visual setting, things that more naturally can present themselves on screen. So it's a little bit more of a natural adaptation. But yeah, I'm excited to see what happens. We'll see. All three are making their way. Lily and the Octopus has a lot of special effects components. The editor, it is not quite historical fiction, but it is of a time period. It takes place in the early 1990s, and 1990s New York. That would be something to recreate on screen. But the Gunkle, you get the right actor, a couple kids, the house, and in some ways, it's the easiest film to make. So we'll see which one reaches production and screens first.
I just hope Lionsgate doesn't go, "This is excellent, Patrick. By the way, though, we're moving the setting from Palm Springs to Fallujah."
Well, yeah, I don't know if there are tax breaks in Fallujah right now that would entice them there, but yeah, I mean, the setting is such a character to the story. You're right. It was very fun or interesting to write a story about grief against the setting of this sort of unrelenting, cheerful sunshine, which Palm Springs has. 355 days of the year.
Right.
And it's also a little fish out of water story for these kids who come from Connecticut. And then, are suddenly thrust into living in the California desert, which is kind of the opposite of what they're used to.
I think actually both of them both of the children are exactly the age where they may not understand the more adult nuances of Palm Springs, or whether it was New Orleans or Las Vegas, one of those type places, but it would still be just jaw-droppingly cool. And maybe that's a distraction, to what they're going through. So.
Oh, it's definitely, yeah. And that's the other thing too. It is a distraction. It's a slight distraction to their grief. To suddenly be in this land of sunshine and vacations and swimming pools. But it's definitely a city that more people associate with retirement than with raising kids. Although, people do raise kids here, but it's more associated with golf courses and tennis and retirement than with young kids. So that was fun to play with.
Well, I could sit here and talk to you about all kinds of stuff until you were even more irritated and sleepy than you might be right now. But,
not irritated at all.
Kaylee, well, thanks. Kaylee, I think it might be about time to let some of our participants talk to Patrick.
Absolutely.
Steven, I'm sorry.
Can y'all hear me? I had to switch to this. Okay. Awesome. Just wanted to make sure first. Fantastic. First things first, you talked about your other books, and I made sure to share those links. Is there anything that you wanted to mention about your other books? Because it sounds like a lot of readers here are definitely familiar with the Gunkle, which is awesome, especially if we're reading through the comments. But
to me, I wanted to make sure. It sounded like you gave a really good summary of both books, but it was a question that was brought up in the Q&A before you started giving the summary, so I wanted to make sure I still brought it up.
Yeah, I think I touched on them a little bit, but I will say one of the great joys of having a book that has been as well received as the Gunkle has been, and I'm very touched, and as I said, I think it has a hopefully the book is good, but the fact that the moment that it came out in is the right moment, and the cover is so, there's all sorts of reasons why a book does or doesn't sell or people discover it, but to the extent that it is a book that has been very well received this year, one of the great joys is then people new readers to you as an author, going back and discovering your prior work. So I'd be very, if anyone had enjoyed the Gunkle, I would be very thrilled to share those other books with you. And I think if you like that balance of heartbreak and humor, that hopefully there's a consistency to all three.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think that definitely helps probably these new readers to you understand maybe where to go from there. So we just got another question from Caroline. You mentioned that you're writing the screenplay for the Gunkle now. Do you have your next novel in progress yet? And can you give us any hints about it?
I do. Well, so I talked about how, the publisher didn't see the editor as a natural follow-up to my first novel, and now I'm in my head a little bit too, because people have really embraced the Gunkle, and it's making me now question what's the right thing, because I've been writing something else over the time I was sheltering at home or more quarantining last year. And now I'm not certain, and I've got a sort of competing project in my head that I'm also working on, and so we'll see which one comes next. But it's been a difficult year for writers, and I don't think I'm the only one to say this. That to me it's a very input output business, and we've had all the time for the output. We've had all this time to write, but we haven't been out in the world. We haven't been living life. We haven't been observing people in the same way. And to the extent that we have, they've been behind masks, or, you're not overhearing these sort of rich bits of conversation, all these details that writers love to absorb that makes a book feel, alive. That input part has been difficult in this past year. So we'll see. I'm hard at work, and who, I may have the next two. We'll see.
We definitely love to hear that. And I actually had a question for you, because you were talking earlier, and you were talking about how writing is a very solitary process. Some writers may talk to people, but when we get down into it, writing is only so much you can do with others. I was curious, and I'm sure your readers are a little curious. What's your process? Do you have a place that you write? Do you listen to other people's conversations? Do you have to go out to a shopping mall, or do you go to a cafe? Like, what's your process to write?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate in that I've usually written at home, as it were. I wasn't one who was like working in coffee shops, because I'm too prone to distraction. And if I can't be in charge of the environment, if the temperature's not right, if there's music playing, if there's music with words that distract me, if someone sits at the next table and starts having a really interesting conversation, then I'll be like, and not focus on my work. So I always kind of worked at home, and that was helpful this past year when I had to work at home. I try to keep it limited to a day job. I try to keep semi-regular hours. I live with another writer, married to another writer, so that helps. If I'm feeling blocked, sometimes I can just walk down the hall to where he's working and try to talk through a problem or whatnot. Sometimes that's good or bad. People sometimes think it must be a nightmare. Oh, it must be a nightmare to live with another writer. And honestly, I don't know how my writer friends who, have been married to like business executives or attorneys or something who were suddenly working from home in this past year and are on like loud conference calls all day. I don't know how they write. So to me, at least, my house is quiet.
Yeah.
So I enjoy that.
No, that's amazing. We had actually a really nice stream of comments from Leslie and Sean talking about the sibling relationships in your book. So I kind of wanted to bring that up with the Gunkle. and how Patrick's sibling relationships were well crafted. The love and concern for each other came through, fitting that Patrick was the middle child, and then kind of continuing that of how they liked reading that the siblings and noticed that they had like this close knit relationship. I was curious if you just wanted to add anything about kind of this relationship and maybe your point of view from this.
Yeah, I really love sibling stories. I'm the oldest in real life. I'm the oldest of four, and so they got the short shrift in Lily. The character in Lily only has one sibling, only because I wanted to elevate the sort of central relationship of him and the dog. I had to sort of cut out some ancillary characters. The editor, there's a sibling element to that story as well, and here as well. And I truly love sibling stories. I think it's just a fascinating relationship, your first friendship sometimes, and it's a long relationship, and it's shifting one. They're shifting allegiances, alliances. There's three in this story. Patrick has a brother and a sister. So I'm fascinated by threes because it's invariably, sometimes you're all in agreement, but if there's disagreement, it's often two against one. And it's not always the same two against the same one. And so, here there's an echo of that in Patrick's neighbors. There's a polyamorous relationship, a throuple that lives over the wall. So I don't know how a relationship works with three, but that was fun to explore a little bit. And Patrick and the two kids are kind of a tight threesome as well. So it was, I love that sort of idea of threes, but whenever I can read, I think it's called the Most Fun We Ever Had. Claire Lombardo or something, a story about four sisters. I just finished that recently. And anyway, I love adult sibling stories. There's just so much richness and history to explore.
I love that, especially that idea of the shifting dynamics
Mm-hmm.
and things like that they can continue to engage with. We have a question about your husband. And I think they're asking for his name. So if you want to talk about
Byron Lane, his debut novel came out last summer during the pandemic, which I feel for debuts who came out last year. It just came out in paperback in June. It's called A Star Is Bored. And for years, he was Carrie Fisher's personal assistant, and they had a very close friendship. And so this book is inspired by their friendship. If you like my writing, if you like the humor in my books, you will absolutely love A Star Is Bored. And I highly recommend, because I'm a fan, as well as me keeping peace in my house, I highly recommend it.
Oh my goodness. That's
for real though, don't take my word. The New York Times, the LA Times, he got rave reviews everywhere. So don't take my word for it, but it's a great read.
No, that's amazing. Definitely some stories there. Speaking of that, though, I do always like to ask the question. I know Rick has asked the question before. Any current reads while we're on the topic of books that you enjoy? I don't know if you even have time to read right now. I know
for sure. Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I always have time to read, and then I'm terrible about answering this question, because as soon as it's put, I was like, wait, what have I read? But there's a debut. I always love to spotlight a debut author.
Absolutely.
And this year, there was a book by Emily Austin called "Everyone in This Room Will Someday Be Dead." And I just think it's hilarious, exploration of a sort of a modern anxiety. And despite the title, it's very, very funny. I've been reading a lot of comedies. I did this after I wrote The Editor. I read a lot of fiction that incorporated real life historical figures into fiction, the way I use Jacqueline Onassis as a character. And I don't like to do it while I'm working, because I don't want it to influence what I'm doing. But after the fact, I like to see how other writers handled it. And so I've been reading a lot of comedy this time, or sort of comedy with comedy plus, to sort of see how other authors balance that. And I recently read another book. It's 10 years old, I think, but an arsonist's guide to writers' homes in New England. Very, very funny book by Brock Clark, I think. But anyway, so I've been sort of reading a lot of comedy. I reread Less recently by Andrew Sean Greer, which is fantastic. And yeah, so.
Sorry,
also, we all need a good
down.
laugh now. Yeah.
I've been reading comedy recently too. There's something about needing that. My my book club picked a very morbid book right at the beginning of the pandemic, and I'm like, that's great. I will
Yeah,
finish this.
read the room book
But
club.
like right after that, I'm reading something very lighthearted. We need something lighthearted, which is why everyone needs to go pick up the Gunkle.
Yay.
Right, we all need that. I think we got through all of the questions from the audience. Rick, I just want to make sure we got through all of your questions.
Yeah. I think that anyone that reads this book will be really glad that they spent the time to do it for reasons that go beyond, that was an entertaining read. That's the best I can say it.
Yeah, I shouldn't just say comedy. Obviously, there's deep and there's important things in this book.
There are
But like we were
important
talking
things in
about,
this book.
what we were talking about earlier, the balance, the necessity of messages and stories, but with that, I don't know.
The humor is the spoonful of sugar. It's it's how Mary Poppins got the medicine to go down, and that's what the humor in the Gunkle is there.
You're killing it with these connections. They're fantastic. We're getting another thank you and just so many positivity and loving messages from your readers tonight. I just wanted to make sure that
great. I'm so grateful for everybody who shows up and everyone supporting independent bookstores. Buy a book. It doesn't have to be my book. Buy a book through the independent bookstores. It's been a tough year, and we need you. And because I can't wait to start doing in-person events again soon. I've missed being in bookstores. So I always have to, when I go out on tour, I always have to bring an empty suitcase because I end up buying books in every bookstore I go into. And I'm dragging an extra suitcase that's 75 pounds behind me on the way back. But and I love these events, and I virtual, it's been a godsend in this past year. But if you have writing ambitions in any way, these are little classes sometimes. I tune in. I always learn something, even if it's something not to do. But I always learn something, and how great that that we can tune in from anywhere now. So thank you for doing these.
And thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you to our audience. Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much, Steven. We're so glad we got to celebrate the Gunkle. What an amazing night. What an amazing panel. Thank you, everyone. I shared the books with you one last time. So go ahead, check out those links to Steven's amazing books. And everyone, I hope you have a wonderful night. Stay safe and have a wonderful
night. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you both. Thank you, Bank Square.
Bye. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye.